Well, welcome to this Sunday virtual class sponsored by BYU Library Family History in Provo, Utah. Our presenter for this class today is James Tanner, and he'll be presenting on using the 5 largest online genealogy websites. James has spent many years researching in and teaching genealogy and family history, and his contributions to family history are enormous and extensive. We appreciate him very much for preparing today's class, and we're very interested in hearing about this topic. So I'll now turn the time over to you, James.
We're going to be talking about using the 5 largest online genealogy websites. One of the questions asked just as before we were coming online here today was, what's the criteria for large? Once you get into the billions and billions of records, large is not a very good word. Extraordinarily large websites that are dedicated directly to genealogy. I'm adding one in the 5 that is not a Genealogy as Sense website. You would not think of it as such, but it has now become so valuable that it cannot be overlooked just simply because of its size. So we're going to talk about that, and I'll get right into it. Yes, there are 5, and these are the 5: Ancestry, Family Search, MyHeritage DNA. Well, I've got DNA on there, but it's MyHeritage and Find My Past and Internet Archive. And these are all of the really large websites that are out there. There's lots more, and there's quite a few that are probably classified, a lot of classified as genealogy websites, but on that case, they're either more focused on a particular area. For example, last hour, Catherine was talking about some English websites, and some of those, like the ones she was mentioning, are very useful websites. Some have lots and lots of records, but they're useful if you're only looking at one area. And most of these websites are vastly encyclopedic and carrying records from all over the world. So let's get into it. Just to mention that 2 of the large websites, Ancestry DNA and MyHeritage DNA, are incorporated into the websites themselves, and that makes them extremely valuable. Taking a DNA test without having a family tree is probably only at the level of entertainment value. It has no real genealogical value. Genealogical research or use of DNA test results becomes useful only when you have a well-developed, sourced family tree to support the DNA. Both of these allow you to have a large family tree. Unfortunately, in a lot of instances, the people who have taken a DNA test do not have family trees, and therefore only thing you could possibly do would be to connect them directly and see if they know how your ancestors may be related. So that's just kind of a plug for having a family tree at all. And what's characterized here are literally billions and billions of records. Some of these websites are tremendously large and are growing at a phenomenal rate in acquiring records. And what are we talking about when we talk about these records? What we're talking about is that each of the websites has a way of acquiring additional digital images of original historical records that have genealogical value. For example, the parish registers from the Catholic Church, or registers from the Lutheran Church in England, or records from civil registration records from governments. And these are large blocks of records covering sometimes as much more than 100 years, or even into 200 or 300 or 400 years of time. And the amount of these records is what makes these websites valuable. They allow you to search the records and also allow you to use the same information that you find from the records to build a family tree and discover your ancestry. So it's a valuable way of working, and it certainly supersedes any of the previous ways where we had paper and tried to draw out our pedigrees on pedigree charts and keep track of everything in notebooks. So it makes things a lot more streamlined and easier to work with. And I guess my main issue here is that, and the question is, are you looking at only the records on your side of the wall and missing the long view? It makes me sad, actually, to talk to people and say they're struggling with their genealogy and they're working using one of the programs. They're using Family Search, or they're using Ancestry, or they're using MyHeritage. And I asked them, I said, well, do you use, for instance, Family Search? They're on Family Search. And I say, well, have you used Ancestry? And they say, well, no, I'm not familiar with it. I haven't ever used that program. And I go, well, I mean, I really literally could not understand how I could do genealogical research without referring to all of the 5 programs that I'm talking about today. And you built yourself this wall that says, I'm doing it just here and I'm going to be satisfied. And the problem is that the information that you're missing is greater than the information that you have. There's no question that there are lots of records on each of these websites. And I would suggest that maybe you need to break out of your comfort zone and learn how to use all 5 websites together. Now, there's some issues involved in this, and I'll talk about those as we go along. Primarily, issue is, well, do you put all your family tree on all these websites? Well, archive.org, as I'll mention, is not a genealogy website as such. And so you're not going to have a family tree on that one, but the other 4 do allow family trees to be built. And I'll discuss about what the strategy is on how you do that without feeling overwhelmed. So it is absolutely necessary to understand that each of these websites has unique records not easily found anywhere else. It's not like you're repeating the same set. They're not all competing. It's not like selling gas in a gas station. You go to a gas station to get gas. You don't go to a genealogy website and get genealogy. That's just not the way it works. It's not a commodity. It's set of historical records, they're pretty hysterical in some cases, historical records. Unfortunately, I call them hysterical records all the time. But the problem is that you cannot assume what's on their websites. There's so much information out there that it is just overwhelming. And just spending your time getting to understand what kinds of information you can have. Plus the fact that every one of these websites has some form of record hints or record matching technology, so that they're out there with their computer programs searching records and giving you more information about where the record may be found. And so you'll get a series of hints, and I'll show you how that works and indicate what kind of strategy you have for record hints. Another factor here is that each of these websites has a different kind of search engine. Now, the search engine is the computer program that underlies the finding part of these websites. So when you're looking at Family Search, you go to find a record or to search for a record. Basically, you're in the situation where you're using their method of doing that search. And they sort of rank differently. Some are more successful doing searches and more helpful than other websites. And as I go through each of these 5 websites, I'll explain a little bit about each one and their capabilities for finding records. And most of this, by the way, is my opinion, but my opinion after using these websites day after day since most of them began. Yep, I predate every single one of them because I predate computers. So I've seen every one of these come from their initial collections online through the whole process of their development. And I've been using them almost constantly during that entire time. So it's a familiarity built with a lot of background experience on the subject here. So let's look at each of these websites and learn a little bit about its unique content. I'm not going to go into details about the record sets. That's something you'll need to explore for yourself, because that depends on your particular ancestral set. My set from England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland probably doesn't match yours from Germany and or Eastern Europe or Spain or wherever your people have ultimately came from. So it's important that you kind of adjust for the backgrounds and what you're actually going to be searching for as you look for information from these. And we're going to start with Family Search. Family Search is really originally the Genealogical Society of Utah, and it's been around since 1894 and been acquiring records since 1894. So one thing about Family Search that's important to understand is that it has records that nobody has now because they don't exist anyplace else. The records have either been subsequently destroyed or they're subsequently unavailable to anyone. And Family Search is basically the repository that has preserved those records when they were destroyed. So there's a lot of information on Family Search that you're not going to find on other websites. There's a huge number of discussions going on about Family Search on the Greater Genealogical worldwide community. But one of the core things that you can't deny about the program is that it's free and that they have records that no one else has. For example, just a simple example is if you have any Latin American ancestors, you're more likely to find the records on Family Search than any other website, period. End of story. So you just have to understand what's there and how it gets there. So let's kind of look at Family Search and see what the highlights are about this particular program. First of all, it's free. That makes it a big difference because the other three large genealogy websites are all behind paywalls, meaning you have to have a subscription to those websites. And they're reasonably priced. I can't really discuss too much about the idea of whether or not people should be charging for it or not charging for it. I'm just grateful that there is a way to get the information without me having to travel to every single little library and archive throughout the world, and that people are willing to put these records online and save me the cost of airfare and hotels and time it would take me to get the information for myself. So I think the trade-off here is fairly obvious. One trip to practically any place in the United States for over more than 1 or 2 days would have an expense involved that would be far over the amount of money it would cost to have one of these programs for a year. So that's kind of the trade-off. And if you understand that historically genealogists were limited exactly to that, they were limited to the places they could visit or the people they could hire to go to the places they could visit. So that's why this is such a good bargain. And I mentioned already that there are billions of records on Family Search. There's something over 5 billion records as they're counted. And another point about record sets on these large websites and all websites, there's a lot of websites out there that claim to have the largest collection in the world, and they go on and on. No one really understands, except each individual company, the way that they count their records. Everybody counts them differently. Some people count every name in every record as a separate record. There's some argument for that, but it gives you sort of an inflated view of actually how much information. For example, if you counted every name in every newspaper that you had, you'd have billions of more names than you would find useful. And so it's just sort of an interesting kind of situation. But they do all have just extensive, let's call it very extensive record sets. And new records are being added every day. Family Search is actively involved in digitizing records around the world. There are somewhere in the neighborhood of over 300 cameras out digitizing 7 days a week. They wonder why they digitize 7 days a week. Well, because the world turns and it's a different day every place else. And so, in other words, they're just everywhere around the world digitizing records, and they're pouring in electronically now into Family Search. And if you go to the FamilySearch.org website and look under the images category, under the search images, you come up with a screen that will give you a number of records being added every second. It'll just keep clicking. So it's just an incredibly large effort. One example I like to refer to is that I recently went to a conference for the Foundation for Eastern European Family History Studies conference in Salt Lake City. And one of the things they talked about was the records being digitized by Family Search in the Ukraine. And they have currently 30 cameras working in the Ukraine, and their plans were to have over 100 cameras working by the end of the year. The obvious reason is they're trying to digitize the records before they are destroyed. So basically, there's a lot of effort going on by Family Search to obtain additional records. And in addition to everything else, Family Search is in the business of preserving records, and they have one of the largest record repositories for preservation. It's called the Granite Vault, and it's up one of the canyons in the mountains east of Salt Lake City. And it's dug back into solid granite and is totally climate controlled for record preservation. It's a fabulous organization and has a fabulous number of records. The next one we'll look at is Ancestry. Ancestry claims to be the largest in the world of having the most records and the largest collections. They may very well be correct. It's hard, like I mentioned, to really put a number on anything, and the large numbers that come out don't help much if they don't give you a specific description or definition of what they mean by record. But in anybody's estimation, Ancestry does have a tremendous number of records. I would say that the primary area that the records are from English-speaking countries. That does not mean they don't have large collections of records from lots of different countries around the world. It's just there are more records from the United States and the British Isles than probably any other website, including Family Search. And one thing that's very important about these record sets is whether or not the record sets are indexed. And in this case, Family Search's records are in the process of being indexed. In fact, they're being indexed by artificial intelligence in a lot of countries, but the indexing process on Family Search is way behind the total number of records that they have available. However, Ancestry has kept up with their indexing, and as far as we know, there are all the records on the Ancestry, Find My Past, and on MyHeritage. All those three websites have all their record sets indexed. Now, indexes is another issue that I could discuss for an hour at least. Indexes are not perfect, and because you can't find something in an index does not mean the record is not there, and you need to really rely on looking at the original records and making sure you're getting the information, complete information from those records. Ancestry does have a superior search engine. It will often find information that will not show up on a search on Family Search, for example, if you just want to make a comparison back and forth. But on the other hand, it's not perfect either, so it may not find records that you can find if you do different kinds of searches. And once you can supply a date, a place, and a name and actually have done the search, then yes, you can perhaps find the record. And they also have constant records being added. In fact, their claim for this year is that they're going to add 50 million more records. It's going to be interesting to watch the new records being listed to see where they are. It appears from initially that they may be from a lot of newspaper records. They may have acquired considerably more records from newspapers. Sometimes when you see a large jump in the number of records from these websites, it's because they've acquired a company, and I'm going to talk about each company's, all the companies they own. For example, MyHeritage jumped and had ended up with almost 1.5 billion records from France. That was merely a result of having purchased a French genealogy company that we'll talk about. The other part of Ancestry that makes it valuable is that it has extensive DNA support. I mentioned previously that having a family tree and a DNA test is how you use the DNA. You don't use DNA in the abstract. It doesn't do you much good. But if you can use it with a large family tree, even if you begin your family tree by working with it and building a tree from your DNA supported information, that's helpful. But without the family tree connection, DNA has a great lesser utility than it would otherwise. And I mentioned that all the records were indexed. These are the Ancestry-owned companies. You can find this just by doing a search and just say Ancestry-owned companies, and it will come up with this list of people. This is actually off their Ancestry corporate website. If they've got additional ones, they haven't put them on their website, and I was not aware of them. Just a real quick going through here. Progenealogist, Ancestry DNA is the DNA portion. It's actually a separate company from the genealogical company. And Ancestry progenealogists are professional genealogists who will, for a fee, do genealogy, and they're very good. And some of them are my friends, and they do a lot of information. It's an excellent organization. Ancestry Academy is educational part. Ancestry Institution is it's an institutional copy of the program, and it's the library editions that go into libraries around the world. So your local library may have a copy of Ancestry library edition. Fold 3 is their military record part. So you don't find a lot of military records on Ancestry.com, but you will find a lot of records, primarily those copied from the United States the National Archives. So those are records that are going into Fold 3, particularly the military-related records. And then there's some others. One of the others, RootsWeb, is an old company, is an old website that's been online for many, many years and was purchased by Ancestry. It has a lot of basic information. And newspapers.com purports to be the largest newspaper website, and it's very valuable. It's primarily North American newspapers, but they're expanding out into Europe and Australia and beyond. Then there's a memories area called We Remember. And then there's another program called Find a Grave, which has been very helpful and has easily the largest grave locator cemetery identification program that's available out there. Archives is another program that is purchased. It has a lot of books in it. It's basically a rare book collection. And then there's Forces War records that have additional, these are records from England, from United Kingdom military records. So there's kind of the summary of what happens there with Ancestry. Now we're going to move on to MyHeritage. MyHeritage is an Israeli company with a European record base, meaning that the company itself is located outside of Tel Aviv, Israel, in a suburb, but it is primarily focused on European records and has a European predominant number of people using the program are from Europe. Okay, so what's the advantage of this? In other words, MyHeritage has whole countries' records. If you look at a country like Denmark, for instance, MyHeritage went in and bought the records, in a sense, from Denmark, and now has an entirely indexed set of Danish records from the 1600s. And their record search program is extraordinary. If you focus on European countries like all of the Scandinavian countries, Germany in all its iterations, France, and other European countries, you're going to find that the records are on MyHeritage that you might be surprised that they're even there, but they're in extraordinarily large collections that are completely indexed and searchable. They also have a huge DNA database, also from Europe, for example. If you look at the matches that you're receiving from taking different DNA tests, like the difference between Ancestry and MyHeritage is Ancestry, I have a DNA test, I have thousands and thousands of DNA matches. But if you look at them by country, you'll see that they're primarily from the United States and British Empire countries. If I go to MyHeritage, yes, I have a lot of matches in the United States and from the British Isles, but I also have matches from all over the world in every country. It seems inexhaustible. I can't understand why I'm related to all these people, but I have no way of knowing, and I have no way of finding out because many of them don't have family trees, so I really can't tell who they are. And I would say they have a very superior search and matching technology. What I encourage people to do with MyHeritage is go on to MyHeritage and build a family tree from scratch using the record matches that they have. And let be surprised at what they would find. It is not very productive to go on to MyHeritage and start doing record searches for individual records for individuals. That just is, in my opinion, a waste of your time, because their search technology is so much faster and better that if they do have the records, they will have searched for it and they will have given you a possibility of a match. Doesn't mean every single match that comes up is automatically correct, but it does mean that you will have a lot faster way of finding information than trying to do the job yourself. And as I mentioned, their records are all indexed. Here's an idea of the numbers that we're talking about. Everything on MyHeritage is translated into 42 different languages. So if you do a search for John and whatever search, it will translate that into the equivalent, like Juan and Johannes and every other language. So your searches are more exhaustive. Okay, here are the companies that are acquired by MyHeritage. This is over quite a period of time because some of these now have been owned for years and years. They own a website that is also has a genealogy program, Legacy, and that's now owned by Family Search, and they have the webinar series that's also part of MyHeritage. And then they bought Genie and Family Link and another program called Kindo over in England, and Filet, which I mentioned earlier, from France, and World Vital Records. They're also branching out into programs that involve a lot of photographs. Their photographic programs are exceptional. They're just absolutely astounding, would be a good point. If you haven't seen what MyHeritage can do with photographs, then you're missing a really good treat. And if you just go online and look for MyHeritage, and you'll find their ads and their commercial and their blog posts and everything that'll show you how all that photographic stuff works. It's an amazing process, and they use artificial intelligence, and it's at least, or if not more sophisticated than any other programs out there in repairing old photographs and animating photographs and identifying the people in the photographs. And also they just recently added a dating program that will automatically tell you the date that the photograph was probably taken. And it's very accurate. I tested it for quite a while, and I agreed with almost everything it said, period, no question. So there's some very fabulous things going on at MyHeritage. This will give you an idea. When that happens, they basically tell you and have moved off onto another thing. Findmypast.com you may be less familiar with this than you would be with either Ancestry or Family Search, and maybe MyHeritage. But Find My Past is a British company. It's in Great Britain, and it's Scottish owned. And primarily, if you think in terms of the old British Empire, the greater British Empire, meaning all of the countries that were claimed by Britain in over historical times, from South Africa and all of the other places around the world. This is the record sets they have. For example, if your ancestors, one of my friends' ancestors' parents, actually, her family, herself, were born in India. She's British, and she was born in, their family was all from India. And her record sets are all on Find My Past for all the Indian, what you might call expatriate British who lived in India. So there's surprising things in all of these websites. Here's one thing surprising about Find My Past. There's two things. One is Find My Past is in the process of adding every marriage record that they're able to find in the United States. So their marriage records in the United States collection is extremely extensive. The second part of it is that for many years, Family Search had tried to digitize Catholic records in the United States, and because of some opposition from the Catholic Church, was unable to do that, primarily because Family Search is sponsored by the Church Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so what happened a few years ago was that Find My Past came in and started making agreements with the Catholic diocese, and is in the process of adding millions and millions and millions of Catholic records from the United States going back into the colonial times. So this is all along the eastern seaboard and expanding into the continental United States. So there's this tremendously valuable types of records that are not on any of the other websites at all, period. So it's hands down the best source for British Isle records. And I mentioned the extensive Catholic records, and more records are being added every week. Every week I get a notice from Find My Past telling me additional record sets that have been added to the website. And all the records are indexed. By the way, it's owned by a company called DC Thomson. It's a Scottish publishing company. And unless you're from England, you may not recognize some of these publications and some of the things that are associated. One of the reasons I decided to add the issue of who owned it and what did they own is because you needed to get a perspective on the fact that these were not just in most cases they are either very large companies on their own account, such as Ancestry, which is a large company by anybody's measure, and it's primarily either both DNA and family history, and that's most of what it does. With all the other companies are related through genealogy. However, Find My Past is merely one part of a very large publishing company that publishes a lot of magazines and newspapers and things in Great Britain. And then, which I didn't mention, of course, and I'll go back through that, is that Family Search is a corporation that's solely owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Ancestry is privately owned. It's private by some investor companies. Find My Past is owned, as I've got it here, by DC Thomson, the Scottish publishing company. And MyHeritage, which I mentioned, is also owned by private investment companies, but the control of the company is still in Tel Aviv, and that the management company, the managers of MyHeritage, are still in control of that company. So next, we've got the surprise, and it's already been acknowledged in one case here today that they weren't familiar with this website. Well, this is one of the ideas in adding this as a website. There are some things about the internet that have become absolutely remarkable. And this is in the category of remarkable, because what this is a website that is attempting to gather almost every form of record that can be digitized into one absolutely humongous website. So what we have here is a website called archive.org, real short. Don't get confused with archive.com or archive.whatever, gov or any of those, because those are or archives or whatever. It's just archive.org or the Internet Archive. And the reason why it's the Internet Archive is because they make a copy about once a week or so of every single website out there on the internet. They have hundreds and hundreds of billions of digital copies of the history of the internet going back to the very beginning. So not too long ago, I decided to do a presentation like this, and it's on the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel, about the history of family search. And I was able to go into this, which is called the Wayback Machine, and get copies of the websites all the way back to the original website that was released by Family Search. And that's just one of the resources. But what I'm going to focus on here, along with all the others, they have videos and audio files and software files and images and everything. But the important thing for genealogists is that this now is close to being, and very soon will be, the largest repository for books and records, print records in the world, period. It will exceed the size of the Library of Congress or any other repository out there for the number of actual materials that they have that are searchable. And understand that their collections, if you look down here, there are collections in the area of 1.3 petabytes. A petabyte is 1,000 terabytes. That's how much information they're storing on this website. It's completely searchable, word for word, every single book on here. 38 million books. And think about what's here. All of the things that are on here include records, original records that aren't available anyplace else, first of all. Secondly, there are county, state, government, national, all sorts of historical records, every kind of record, and all these publications, these genealogical publications, like the New England Historical Journal and all these journals and things. This is all on this archive.org. If you think about Google Books, and you look on Google Books and you look up a book on Google Books just to look it up, or you think of WorldCat and you go look on a book on worldcat.org from all the catalogs in the world, then you think about archive.org as the place where you just might find the whole book there available to read word for word. And just to give you an idea of how this is doing, this slide here, I did this slide a couple of weeks ago in preparation. I'm always trying to be about a month ahead or more in preparing these presentations, and then I go back and update them and review them just before I do the presentation. That way I can make sure I get that all done and I'm not working on the last minute trying to complete something, because some of these can take hours, days of work. Okay, but here we are. It was, now look at this number, 38.299. Okay, 38 million publications, not pages, publications. So these are print, audio, video, and all that. But then let's look at every word index, but let's look at the next thing. So here's a blow up of it. And you can see what happens on a research. So if I go to, well, what happened? Okay. So what happened here is that I just looked at this and it's gone up almost 100,000 in the last month or so. 100,000 new books on this one website. Okay. So here we are. This is a book for Burke County, Pennsylvania, history. And here are 296 books or publications talking about records that could be Berks County or Berks or Berks. There's two different. And so we're basically here with a lot of information that you can find. Now comes the ultimate question. Why use all these 5 websites? What's the point in spending time to learn and working with these websites? Well, the answer is quite straightforward. If you're not, you're missing a whole lot of information that may help you answer questions that you have. And secondly, if you start to get into this process and understanding that, so my basic principle is that I know it's there. In other words, if I'm looking for some information, I take the attitude, I know it's on the internet, so now I'm going to find it. And here are the ones that I can start with that will give me probably the best quick way of finding any kind of specific information. So, for example, if I'm, like I do all the time, research in England, because I have a lot of English ancestors, I have 3 websites open. I have Family Search, I have Ancestry, and I have Find My Past. And if I'm looking for a name and I don't find it in Family Search, then I look for it and build my family tree on that particular line to that person. And then I look for that information on Ancestry. And then I also do searches on Find My Past. So do I maintain family trees on all these websites? Yes, I do maintain family trees, but I don't maintain them all. I have chosen to maintain the family tree I have on all of the websites, but I also primarily get the information into Family Search, obviously, because of my own personal interests. But that's not to say that the same information isn't available and being used for searches on MyHeritage. Now, let's say I switched to doing research for my Danish ancestors, then I would be primarily building my tree and doing research on MyHeritage because they would have a higher possibility of finding Danish research than any other website, including Family Search, because all the records on MyHeritage are indexed. And so it just depends on where, as I mentioned, where your emphasis is, where your family came from. But in essence, all of these programs are available. So do I really need a family tree on each of the websites? Yes, but I don't think you need to put your whole family tree on every website. I think what you need to be is to focus on your interests, what you're interested in doing the research, and make sure that that information and the sources and the information for each person is on the websites that you're using to do that research. So my whole use of all these websites, including Family Search, is research oriented. In other words, I'm only actively maintaining the family tree to the basis of what my current research is. I don't feel it's necessary for me to keep up with all the changes that are being made on Family Search, for example. I don't need to worry about that. I'm no longer concerned about the identity of the people that are involved. Now, if there's some issue with the identity of an individual, such as somebody way out on an end of line or whatever, then those are I may be interested in that, and in case of each of these, watch or be careful to see what information was available on those people. But I'm usually just doing research on descendants and people that are generally available if the records are available. In addition, I do a tremendous amount of Latin American research and helping people. And Family Search is just absolutely the most valuable website out there. So it's just a matter of what your interests are and what you're doing, but don't feel like you're obligated to maintain each of these trees. That's way beyond any kind of utility out there. I don't need to know how many people have added, for instance, sources to my grandparents. I may be interested if there's something out of from reason to look at that would be interested, but it's not the area of what I'm focusing on. So I'm using these websites primarily for research purposes, and that way, that's why they're all so valuable. And I just have to mention that Archive Org does not have a family tree. It's not a genealogy website as such. It's a huge library. So here's some reasons for having the trees out there, and just go through them quickly. Increase the chances of finding your genealogical records. Yes, there's a tremendous increase in the possibility that the people will be found, especially if you're looking on the websites that have those records that are, say, unique to a particular area. Increase the chances of connecting with family members. This is particularly true if you have an Ancestry DNA test and a DNA test from MyHeritage. Both of those companies will give you, if you had a robust, well-documented family tree on either of those, you're going to get maybe hundreds and possibly thousands of DNA matches. Now, what are the worth of DNA? That's a whole nother subject, obviously, of whether or not that makes any value. What I look at DNA as is a validating thing. In other words, if I start getting relatives that show that I am related to different people, what it tells me is, yes, I really have got relatives. It's not something that I've just supposed or imagined because I thought the records said that I was related to those people. So it's really a validating thing. It also is, I would encourage to use all available record hints, but I don't use all the record hints on all the people. I don't feel any obligation to go back and fill in records to people that I've already done research for years. I have no question that who I know about my parents and my grandparents and my great-grandparents. In fact, back 6 generations, I have no controversy. And so I don't find that to be useful activity, especially at my age. But that's just a consideration. And I would certainly encourage DNA matches from both Ancestry and MyHeritage, because both of these will give you some very interesting observations. And it's very possible that you'll find people in these programs that you did not know existed. And there's lots of other resources on all these websites. So there's just tons of different things, tools and record analysis and all sorts of resources. Every time you get involved, you'll find more information and more things that you didn't know existed. Now, what if you need to learn these websites? Well, here's the answer to that. The Family History Guide, the fhguide.com, it has basic instructions for family search, ancestry, MyHeritage, and Find My Past. We do not have, as yet, instructions for the archive.org website. Actually, I can't imagine if you know how to use a library, you know how to use archive.org. It's just like having a library. But these other websites do take some instruction, and there are step-by-step instructions for free on this website. And I would just mention the Family History Guide has now been incorporated in the Learning Center as part of FamilySearch.org. So it is actually part of that program today. The other part of this is the strategy. And you need to develop your own strategy and how this works. And at first, it may be a little bit confusing. But as you get used to looking at your records and following your family tree back on all or 2 or 3 of these programs at once, you'll begin to see the power of using all that information to build a family tree. You may find a record on Ancestry that is not showing up on Family Search, and you add that in. And then if you add that information into your Family Search program, then all of a sudden you may find additional records that haven't shown up on Ancestry, for example. And you may also find additional records on Find My Past that do not on the others, and MyHeritage, as they all work together. So it's an amazing way, and it's an extremely valuable way to do research. Choose your own research goals. Don't be driven by record hints or other website-generated suggestions. I say this as I just got a record suggestion from Family Search and spent an hour or so trying to correct the records that were on Family Search because the information from the hint was wrong. But that's, that's just a part of this whole genealogical search. Now, what about the family trees? Well, the family tree that you have on Family Search is on the universal family tree. That's everyone's family tree. You're all looking at everyone's looking at the same family tree at all times, and that's why it seems to change, because it's a shared, contributed family tree. The trees you have on Ancestry, Find My Past and MyHeritage, are your individual trees, and unless you invite people, they're not going to make changes. So you don't have to worry about information changing. Now, if you're worried about information changing on Family Search, you can use the other programs as your might say guarded area, your place where you can keep your information and build up yours. But I hope you're educated by the changes that come on Family Search, because sometimes people have a tendency to think they know exactly the way it goes, and they don't look at the sources and realize how much it is. Okay, so that's kind of so one other kind of cautions that I would make, and this goes primarily to Family Search, but you'll see the same thing on other websites. It's just not as obvious, and that is, don't waste your time researching revolving door ancestors on any one website. That means don't waste. If somebody's changing every week and people are adding information every week, just ignore it. Wait till it settles down. You're just dealing with people who aren't looking at sources, and they're going to be very frustrating. So just move on to other areas, and you'll find out that not everything is as serious as that. I'd also encourage you, as here at the end, to avoid the allure of the unknown past. Don't go jumping back in time. Don't feel like you have to start in the 1500s to start looking for people, because you're going to end up either being totally wrong or totally frustrated. You need to work back systematically always as you get there. I would encourage that, because the difficulty of doing research beyond about 1750 AD increases astronomically. It just becomes very, very, very much more difficult to do because of language, handwriting, record availability, record access, preservation of the existing records, and everything else that goes along with going back that far in time. And you can use the free editions of each of these websites in a family search center, which are scattered all over the world. So if you look for Family Search Centers map, then you'll find this website little tool here that will take you in and show you where the locations are of these over 5,000 family search centers around the world. So don't try to do research with blinders. Don't ignore these other websites simply because A, they cost money, or B, because they are too hard to use, or C, you just don't want to look at them. Be sure and expand your universe and understand that there's a whole universe of opportunity waiting with all this information that's on these various websites. Okay. Well, thank you for watching.
Well, thank you, James. We do have a few questions. John Fisher says, which is the best site to store everything?
There is no one site for storing everything anyplace. The only way you can have a site to store is to use multiple backups in multiple different places. I would put it online in the programs. I would put it on my own hard drives, and I would back up to the network, which is what I do. You can't count on anybody not having a problem at some point of time. You just really need to make sure that you keep your records wherever you can. But Family Search is the one that long-term has the commitment for keeping records. But I have to admit, they aren't perfect either.
Okay, here's one from Elizabeth.
Family Search Centers have the library editions of these for free for everyone. Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because of their partner relationship of the church with these websites and Family Search with these websites, have free access to all of these websites. And archive.org and Family Search are both free anyway.
Here's another one from John. Do I have to pay extra for each of these extra companies like newspapers in Ancestry?
Yes, that's the simple answer. Every one of those is a separate subscription. That's not the case with MyHeritage. MyHeritage, you have the entire subscription. Find My Past has other records that you're going to have to pay for, even with the subscription.
One question here, do you have your own private tree that you keep on your computer? She's asking about all the companies owned by Ancestry and MyHeritage.
My answer to that is I have my family tree on all four, the basic tree. I also have it on my computer on a program called Roots Magic. I also have it in Roots Magic, but only one I keep up to date all the time is Family Search, and that's just because I'm old and don't have time to do everything before I pass on. But I keep all the information in Family Search, but I really don't do that as much as I should. But I do have it on Ancestry and MyHeritage and Find My Past.